Hey, welcome to With Him podcast. I am so excited today. I am Raz. This is my cohort, Dr. J over here, causing trouble. But we are so pumped because we are getting a part 2 with our buddy from Truth in Media, Ben Swann, and he is an investigative journalist. If you've not heard the first part of this, you want to go back and check it out. God has done amazing things to bring him to the place that he's at, and I love that he is giving glory to him. He's not saying that it's about him. It's about the process of being with the Lord and being with him and seeing where he leads out, and a lot of that space was difficult. If you'll go back and listen to that, and it's even continue to be. That's what we're in this life, you know. So, but we are super pumped because I'm going to jump into it because we got a lot of really cool story to get to today. And so I am going to introduce him again. Thank you so much, Ben Swann, for being in here with us. We really appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Raz. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Love the first podcast with you. It's fantastic. Just hearing. Actually, there was a few things I didn't know in there, so I didn't know you were doing like the circuit riding in Texas. You know, I didn't know a few of those. I knew about the up in the Northwest. I didn't know about that. But anyway, it's a good. So go back and check it out, everybody. So I'm going inside on purpose so that you'll wonder about that and you'll go check it out. But hey, Ben, I first met you when you came to Cincinnati, and you guys came, if I remember right, I think you and your family, your wife and kids, came to a Christmas Eve service at our chapel here in Little Marymount, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio here. What brought you out here, and how did you end up with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I also encourage people to watch the first part, right? So to catch you up, because basically at the time I was working in Texas as a news anchor. I had been that morning show anchor that we talked about before, and then I eventually left that station, had to restart, by the way, as a videographer, news photographer again, and got hired as the primary anchor, only a 6 p.m. anchor. So I was offered a job as the primary anchor at the #1 station, but the offer wasn't right. I just felt like God was saying, nope, this is not right. And so I turned it down. People were shocked that I turned it down to be their primary anchor. And instead took a job as a reporter at the competing station that was like a third place station, and only 6 p.m. They said, we'll make you the 6 p.m. anchor. And so I took that job, and within a short amount of time, that 6 p.m. newscast became #1. And then there was this crazy drug war that broke out in Mexico. So this is 2008, 2009, 2010, around that time. And there was this drug war that was sweeping the entire country of Mexico. Cartels all had their own territories, and then were killing each other. And then they all owned different functions of police, state police, local police, federal police, military, right? So then they're all fighting each other. It was insane. So that war comes to the city of Juarez, which is right across the border from El Paso. Literally, you could, throw a rock across and you're in Juarez. 3 million people live in Juarez. Just under 1 million people live in El Paso. And so this war breaks out. And the crazy thing was nobody in local news covered it at all. Like, we didn't talk about it at all. So you had the most violent city in the world. The most journalists were dying there. There were more journalists being killed in Mexico than were being killed in Baghdad at the time. It was totally nuts. And nobody covered it. And so I remember sitting in a meeting, and again, I'm just the 6 p.m. guy, right? And I'm talking to the consultant who's in town, and he's saying, what can we do? And I said, why aren't we covering what's happening in Mexico? Oh, because viewers don't care about that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, listen, when I am around my family, I'm around my wife's family, and by this time we have 5 kids, right? So we've been here, we have a lot of life going on. I was working for another church as their lead teaching pastor at the time. Everywhere I go, I said, that's all people are talking about.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I said, but you're saying they don't care about it. Well, they don't care because we've done research and people say they don't care about what's happening in Juarez. And I say, guys, people don't care about the politics of Juarez. They don't care about, news about potholes or city council. They care about the fact that 40,000 people are being killed there. They care about the fact that buildings are being burned down, or you drive across in the morning and there's headless bodies hanging from overpasses. People care about that stuff. They didn't believe me. So I said, you know what? Fine. I anchored the 6 p.m. news. I would go to work in the morning. I would walk into the building. I got a photographer and I said, you're coming with me. We got in the car and we just drove across the border. And we started covering it.
What year is this?
This is 2009.
Okay.
2009.
Wow.
And we're shooting video.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, we're driving over, and I'm not exaggerating. There are decapitated bodies hanging from overpasses that you would drive.
Wow.
I've heard none of this. Wow.
It was completely insane. So we just start covering it. And as we start covering it, all of a sudden, like our viewership starts going up. People are like, oh, someone's finally talking about this. And within a few months, we were the #1 newscast. Every other station in town was now covering it every day. National media started coming down and covering it finally. There was a lot of crazy stuff. You know, we were almost kidnapped at one point. It was like totally wild. So it got like so crazy going over there. And I was unhappy. You know, my contract was coming to an end. My boss was like, I think that you should look someplace else. I had an agent. My agent comes to me and says, you know, we have an offer for you from Cincinnati, Ohio. I did not want to go to Cincinnati.
Did you know where Cincinnati was?
So I had flown out for an interview. Though the interesting thing was earlier that same year, I had an offer from Indianapolis.
Oh gosh, that's crazy.
In January.
Oh.
And when we landed, I guess it was like 30 below zero with the wind chill. I got off the plane and I literally had a migraine within like 2 minutes.
Wow.
Went to the hotel, got in like a hot bathtub. I called my wife. I'm like, I feel like I'm going to puke. Like, this is horrible. My head has never hurt like this. So I turned down that job. I was like, there's no way I'm going to this city. Like, this is horrible. Then I got an offer to go to Cincinnati. So when he told me about the offer, I flew to Cincinnati to check it out. I was like, this is like Indianapolis. I'm not going to that place. I got there and I was like, well, this place is beautiful. It doesn't look like Indianapolis at all, right? It reminded me more of Portland when we lived in Oregon than it did Indianapolis. And as you guys know, like the 7 hills there, and like Cincinnati's
real nice.
Beautiful. Indianapolis is horribly ugly, as I said. It's just, you know, flat.
We love you, Indy, but you know, truth is truth.
People are great, but it is not a visually beautiful place to be, for sure.
Yep.
So I didn't really want to go. My wife wanted to go. She's like, "You're going to get yourself killed." As I said, we had almost gotten kidnapped at one point, being over there, and just a lot of craziness was happening. And so our family voted. We let our family vote.
Okay.
And all 5 kids and my wife voted to go to Cincinnati, and I was the only one who voted not to go.
Wow.
So I was like,
you just wanted to stay there? Did you just want to stay there? Or did you
want to go there? I wanted to go straight to New York. I wanted to jump from there to work for Fox in New York, is what was my.
Okay.
But then I guess got out of the plan. So it was like, that's not happening.
Yeah. So
we ended up going to Cincinnati, and I had, because I had been in ministry, I had already started looking online, and I found this job posting, which actually was outdated at that point. But it was at Marymount Church. And so I had a couple of emails with the pastor at the time, didn't suppose they did. We emailed back and forth some. And so he mentioned there was this tree lighting service, and we were like, cool. So we got into town. The weekend we got into town was the same weekend as the tree lighting service. So we had literally had arrived. We were staying in a hotel. We got in a car and we drove to Marymount. We couldn't even find Marymount for a while. We were like, it feels like we're going so far. This can't possibly be right. And all of a sudden we get there. And it was like,
yeah, with the tree just lights it up. It's
this like village that's like out of a postcard.
Right. Well, I always tell people it's the most like Rockwellian like place ever. I mean, literally, like he came and painted all his pictures here or something. But
absolutely, it doesn't look real at all. Like when you show up, you're like, it's a real place where people really live. But that's okay because it's probably going to be, you know, the service is on like this chapel, and so it's going to probably be like hymns and super stilted. And I remember we get inside the chapel, and because there's 7 of us, that's 5 kids, 2 adults, we can't all sit together. So I take a couple of the kids and we go sit in a row closer to the front. My wife's like, we're going to sit back here, and so she's got a couple of them, and so we're sitting on opposite sides of the chapel, right? I'm up ahead, she's behind, and then I remember the first song that you played, Paul, Raz it was Joy to the World, but it was that other version of Joy to the World, Unspeakable Joy.
Yeah.
Yep.
The moment you started to play and sing, I just like froze, and I looked back, and she's already looking at me, and we both went like this at each other.
Nice.
This is the place. Like it was unbelievable. Goosebumps even thinking about it now. It was just like you know, you come from so far away, and we're moving our whole lives there, and we don't know anybody there. And it was like, in that moment, it was like, oh my God, no, this is absolutely where we're supposed to be. So we never church shopped. We never jumped from place to place like that. It was the first weekend, and it was like, that's it from this moment on. So it was, so that was, again, we're talking about, trusting God in your process and what does that look like? God creates opportunities. And I mentioned before, sometimes you don't even want those opportunities. But when you step into it, I think especially when you're hesitant, God will give you confirmations. Like, yes, this is what I want. Yes, this is where you're supposed to be. I know you don't like it. This is where you're supposed to be. And so that, to me, that was like the biggest confirmation was, yeah, this is absolutely where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's cool. Something too that I think our listeners should know is that I think when they think of a person like you, they're like, oh, this guy's a millionaire and he's blah blah blah. Well, you guys came. You have. Oh, I should know this. I'm sorry. You guys have 5 kids, right? 5. Okay, good. I was like, oh no, am I missing one? I'm thinking it's 5 kids. But anyway, you guys lived in one of these tiny little houses here in Fairfax with 5 kids. You guys probably, I don't know, did you guys have 2 bed? Do you guys even have 3 bedrooms in that house? I don't know.
Well, it did have 4, actually. It had 4 because they had upstairs.
Okay. Oh yeah. They kind of made the upstairs thing, but when you guys came, I mean, there was sacrifice in what you guys were doing. Like you guys came, and I remember all that. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't easy.
No,
Y'all were packed in there.
We had a house in Texas we were still having to pay for. We were living, we ended up living in a house trying to get rid of debt. We had a lot of debt. We were trying to clear off debt. It was tough. And we weren't making a lot of money. People think that you're on TV, you make a lot of money. That is not true. And it hasn't been true for a long time. But yeah, it was really tough.
Yeah, not to call them out, but like if I remember right, they were like the place where you got hired on was one of the cheaper of the paying news outlets.
Not just cheaper, but one thing that's always happened in my career is that I've always had female co-anchors as an anchor, and they have always made at least double what I make. I was always paid at least half of what my female co-anchors.
That's crazy.
Really?
Has to do twice the work every time.
That is really interesting.
That's a God thing where it's just like he gets me every time with it. Like I'm gonna there's humility built into it.
There you go. That's how he's building that.
You're never going to be the most important one.
Like for Christmas, like you're buying her just some nice little thing. Here's a gift card, Applebee's, and then she's like, yeah, here's a Rolex for you. There you go, buddy. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I wish.
No,
it's more like, thanks. Can I be off tomorrow and you can cover for me?
There you go. That's what it was, right? Well, hey, one of the things that's kind of interesting is, well, here, I'm going to say this first about Cincinnati. The Lord is at work in Cincinnati because every person I know who ends up coming here almost feels like has almost said no. I don't even know where it's at. Like I don't even know if I flew over it. They're calling it flyover country. And Jamie was the same way, but man, you end up coming here and then you're like, this is
great
awesome.
city.
It's almost like you give a first no and you're like, thank you, Lord. This is fantastic. But anyway, what's interesting though is the Lord, it's funny, but I've always felt about you a little bit, and you can correct me on this, but I feel like you've kind of had that Joseph thing going a little bit where you have some difficult stuff, but there's always just sort of a blessing that comes on you, it's the kind of the same thing that happened with Moses and Pharaoh, because you had the same experience here where you came, I guess we can say you came on with Fox here, but they weren't one of the more popular stations. They were like number 3, weren't they, if I remember right, or something like that?
They were number 4.
Number 4. Yeah, and while you were here and you started to do what you were doing, eventually over time, I'm just kicking it out there a little bit, is they ended up becoming number 1 in the cities. Was that correct?
In 2 years. It took only 2 years.
Yeah, in only 2 years. Now, tell us a little bit about, and I'm just going to throw it out there, and I know lots of your fans will remember this, but a lot of people won't know your story because it's been a little while, But you came out with an amazing segment that you would do. I don't remember how often you did it. It felt like it was once a week. Maybe you did it more. I don't remember.
Twice a week.
Twice a week, okay. It was called Reality Check. And tell me about that, how that came about, and just what that did. It was kind of crazy a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was. And this was, again, another thing that was like, I don't want to do this. So, you go to work for the station. I went from just professionally being in the most exciting place on the planet as a journalist, right, to the most boring place on the planet. It was like when you're being chased by cartels in the streets because you're covering the kidnapping of a congressman's niece, right, and that nobody will admit is gone.
Wow.
To we want you to do the pothole patrol. It's like, oh my. What is happening?
Yes. Yeah, they just drive around. They go, oh, that felt like a big one. Hey, film this. Look how much
Yeah,
water is in there.
exactly.
That's
Over
ridiculous.
here on Water Street, another pothole. It was like, what?
Yes.
So,
I bet you were great at it too, man. Really, really good.
Oh no, I never did it. I never did it. Here's what happened.
Good. Oh, good. Okay.
So my news director comes to me and says, so at the time he was like, your co-anchor who's still there, Trisha Mackey, is still there. And says, hey, I love Trisha. She's amazing.
She's cool.
I should say this too. Even though all of my female co-anchors always made twice as much as I did, they were all amazing people and well worth what they made. They were just fantastic. And Trisha was one of those, like incredible journalist, super smart, great anchor, right? Absolutely love her. But they came to me and they said, you're going to have to do something to be known. And so we want you to do a franchise, is what they call it, which is basically just a recurring segment that you do as an anchor. So we don't want you just to be a talking head. Okay. And so they gave me a list and it had like 4 things on it. And one of them was, I kid you not, pothole patrol. And that was the one they wanted me to do. And then I can't remember there were 2 others. I have no idea what they were. I just remember pothole patrol.
Sorry, man.
If anyone would ever even watch this. And then the last one was this one called Reality Check. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, actually, it's being done by our sister station in Minneapolis. And so they showed me, and by the way, all this again comes from consultants, right? Because consultants run the business.
Yeah.
And so the consultant comes in and it's like, oh, we're going to show you segments of it. So I watched it. And it was a guy who was, if you closed your eyes and I said, imagine a middle-aged reporter in a local TV station, you got him. Okay. He's exactly what you would expect. And basically, remember Michelle Bachmann? Remember that name?
I don't.
Michelle Bachmann was like a pretty well-known congresswoman from Minnesota.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Right around 2010. She was pretty popular at the time. She was kind of like Sarah Palin-esque.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Reality Check was actually the Michelle Bachmann check is what it really was. It was every segment they showed me was them fact-checking some statement from Michelle Bachmann.
Okay.
And they're like, it's pretty popular there, but we think you could do it here. So I looked at it and I thought, well, at least it's not potholes, but sure, I'll try it. So I started writing them, and then this was 2011, and we had an election coming up in 2012, and so Ohio at the time, it's not really a swing state anymore, but even as recently as 14 years ago, 12 years ago, it was the swing state of all swing states, right? During the Obama-Romney campaign, it was the state that was going to turn the election. So every single political candidate in the primary and in the general election was constantly in Ohio. That's the one that mattered.
Yep.
And so I remember Herman Cain came to, I remember him, he came to Cincinnati, and I had a chance to interview him. And so at the time he was doing the 999 plan. You remember that?
Sounds familiar.
The 999 plan. He said it was the tax code would be so simple I could write it on the back of a pizza box. Well, of course, he said he used to be the CEO of Godfather's Pizza.
Yeah.
And it was 9% federal tax, 9% payroll tax, 9% state tax.
Mm-hmm.
Is what they would do. And I was like, and I said, I went to go interview him, and I didn't know much. I just, in the car, I was trying to think of something to talk to him about. And I was like, oh, and I pulled up the 999 plan. And I was like, oh, ask him about this. So I go to him and I said, we were in Lumpkin Airport.
Yeah, Lunkin. Yep, Lunkin. Yeah.
So he's there in the airport, and I have a chance to interview him. And I just said, hey, quick question about your 999 plan. And he says, yeah. And I said, so it makes no sense because you said 9% federal and 9% payroll tax and 9% sales tax. He says, yes. He said, but payroll tax is 24%, but an employer pays half of that. They pay 12.2%. So if you cut it down to 9, who's paying the 9? Is it going to be the employer? Is it split between the employee and the employer? And he's like, what? And he starts to, no. It's 999. And it was such a mess. We run this in our reality check, and it actually, he did not ever talk about the 999 plan again after this interview, by the way. But
you ruined it for him, man.
I did. He ruined it for me. I'm like, I actually liked the idea before I did the math. It makes no sense at all. Because he wasn't taking into account payroll taxes aren't paid strictly by the employee. Yeah. Half of it is paid by the employee. Yeah. So it was the 9, 4.5, and 9 plan. But anyways, so we do this, and I remember the reason I remember that night was because at that week we were doing. I was covering each political candidate who was coming to Ohio. And so Herman Cain was on a Thursday night, and a Wednesday night. And I remember because at the time we were showing our Facebook likes on our page, and mine had 999 likes. So I made a joke about the 999 likes on my page. The next day, we ended the segment for the week by doing one on a guy named Ron Paul, who, as you know well, he was your one who delivered your babies.
Exactly.
And Dr. Ron Paul, the congressman from Texas, I didn't know much about him, but basically the segment was called "What's So Wrong with Ron Paul?" and like, why is no one ever talking about this guy? And I went to bed, and then the next day came into work, and they were like, "You've been getting like phone calls and emails all day long."
Yeah.
Last night, and so I went on Facebook, and I was like, "What is going on?" I had 40,000 followers on Facebook.
Holy moly!
Who are these people? And they all had like black things over their eyes. And I was like, who are these weirdos? So people were messaging saying, I can't believe you talked about Ron Paul. I can't believe that you were honest about him or you gave him a fair shake. And I asked them, why do you have black things in your eyes? Because the media blacks him out. They won't talk about it. And I was like, that's not true. What we just talked about him. So, and then they would say things like, have you noticed that like when he was polling at the time in Iowa, number 2, and they said, when Fox will show the polls for Iowa, they'll show you number 1, Rick Santorum, and they'll show you number 3, Mitt Romney, but they won't show number 2. And I was like, that is not true. And so I turned on Fox. I'm like looking through, and sure enough,
what the heck? Yeah.
I was like, what? How is that true? So we followed it up because the news director was like, oh my gosh, something's happening. We should follow it up. So we followed it up just by doing it. I can't remember what the second segment was, but something about it. And then we just went back to covering, politics as usual. But what happened for me personally was I didn't know anything about Ron Paul, even though he was from Texas. As we talked about in the first episode, Texas is a big place.
Yep.
I didn't know anything about it, right? He's on the other side, include Texas.
Mm-hmm.
No idea who he was. No idea about his things. All I knew is this guy runs for president, and they put him at the end of the stage, and he's like a crazy old man who's like, a war and money and
yeah.
Who is this guy?
Yeah.
And so what I did was I just started like learning a little bit about him and his positions on things, and I was like, this is weird. Like some of the things he's saying make a lot of sense. At the time, I was like,
brilliant.
I had always been politically like very much a neocon, very much like a rah rah war USA. They hate us because we're free kind of guy. And then I started listening to what this man was saying, and it was like, this makes a lot of sense. Like something as simple as something called blowback, which is not a Ron Paul term; it's a CIA term that says when we go in other countries, we topple their leadership and we create power vacuums. Sometimes terrible people take over. That's called blowback. Well, yeah, that's absolutely what's happening. Yeah. So that was the start of my kind of awakening. And what I started doing was based on the things that I was finding and researching, we just turned reality check. People say, oh, it turned into a Ron Paul thing. It didn't turn into a Ron Paul thing.
Oh, no.
It turned into a common sense thing. Can we just talk about common sense stuff? Like we started doing segments on local TV about what is the petrodollar and explaining to people coming off the gold standard and how the US dollar was propped up by the Saudis and oil money, right? And the petrodollar. And it's like we did a segment on Gaddafi and the fact that Gaddafi was before the US went in there and had him murdered and overthrew Libya, was trying to create the African denari in order to remove the US dollar as the peg for oil sales across Africa. So we're doing stuff that nobody in local TV's done. And all of a sudden, like not only did my Facebook page become the largest Facebook page, I think at the time it was 500,000 people, largest Facebook page of any local anchor in the United States. It was larger than a lot of
the national ones, yeah.
But like our segment was being viewed in 140 countries.
Wow.
People were watching this thing all
That's crazy.
Cincinnati, Ohio, all over the world.
That's crazy.
We started doing like special follow-ups and everything, and within 2 years, we become the #1 station in Cincinnati. It was unbelievable. And around that time was the time because we had developed such a following that remember there was a big a year before there was a big scandal about the IRS targeting Tea Party groups. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
So a guy who was a member of our church in Marymount came to me and he says, hey, obviously I had this huge platform and people are watching it from everywhere. And he says, I have a story for you. He was the head of a Tea Party group that they were forming in Indian Hill. And he said, the IRS just did something really weird. He said, they ignored our 501c3 application for months. He said, then they contact us and they say, in order to have your 501c3 approved, we need all of your social media printouts of all of your social media pages and all of your spouses and children's social media pages.
Say what?
And he was like, why are they asking for that? I thought you want to know about this. So I said, okay. So I took it and we did a reality check on it, right? And literally there were people in the newsroom who were saying, you're insane. Like the tinfoil hat guy, like you think. Well, then less than a year later, there's a conference call in Washington, D.C. And I remember I walk into the newsroom and the executive producer, who the tinfoil hat guy, comes up running over to me. He says, you were right. I said, what? He says, the IRS just had a conference call, and the head of the IRS tax exempt programs, Lois Lerner, he says, in this, she just threw like a comment at the end that said, oh, and by the way, a group in Cincinnati was targeting Tea Party groups. What? So we find out that the story not only was true, but then they had blamed it on Cincinnati. Well, because we had such a big platform, I literally had IRS agents emailing me and sending me documents saying, it's also a lie. It wasn't targeted in Cincinnati. It was coming out of DC. Here are the people who were in charge. And so we ended up breaking this story. It resulted in Lois Lerner stepping down. It resulted in multiple IRS agents in the company resigning. I was on Fox News. It was like the whole thing blew up. And that was the kind of the final thing that drove us to that #1 status. And it was right around the time that I left. So the amazing thing is I left Fox to start Truth in Media, to start my own thing. And I was technically never in the building the day that they announced that we were #1. The general manager on the phone, I was driving back to Chicago where he shot some video, and he said, I just wanted you to know that we just got our book back, and for the first time in 20 years, we're #1 in ratings and households. And we know it's because of what you were doing with us. So
wow,
so
that's crazy.
But it was an incredible opportunity and experience.
Yeah, the Truth in Media thing just blew up. I mean, that was just crazy. That was just everywhere. What one of the stories and the thing is, again, the position you're in, even when you're talking about like drug cartels and all that, we're always talking about justice, but that's kind of a justice position because we can be in to speak truth, into these things and let people know. Obviously, let people know it's called real journalism. Back wait,
Guys, I'm gonna just pretend real quick.
yeah, go ahead.
It's YouTube right in here.
Yep, no problem.
Yep.
Yeah, the way it was kind of supposed to be, and one of the things, and I love this because this is something that would be on God's heart, is one of your big stories that probably was part of having you move on, we'll say, or something, was this Pizzagate thing that had happened. And that was actually even something where I believe, if I remember right, you began to get notice from the national Fox, part of their group or whatever. But how did you get that? How did you know that information, or how did you learn that and just figure that out? Like you were ahead on that of everybody on that.
Yeah. So, so I had left Cincinnati and I ended up getting out of local TV, then got an offer in Atlanta. And so we ended up coming here to Atlanta, went back into local TV. And then I was working for the CBS affiliate in Atlanta at the time. And we restarted Reality Check as a segment.
Yeah.
And when we did, we had been doing it with a lot of success for, again, almost a year at that point. And then right around the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, there was all this talk about Pizzagate and Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton is eating children in the basement of a pizza parlor,
right?
A crazy ring, and then all of a sudden the media starts reporting that Hillary Clinton, that this whole thing was started by Macedonian sheep farmers on Facebook. All right, if you go back and look it up, this is what they were at the time. Macedonian sheep farmers on Facebook have created a conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton is a child-eating cannibal pedophile. And so I was getting all these requests from people, right? Please look into the story, investigate what's going on with it, tell us what's happening. The story's too crazy. I have no interest in it, right? It's too nuts. But then while I'm working for CBS, we do a story in our newscast about a guy who goes in with a rifle into a pizza place in Washington, D.C. and fires his gun up into the air and threatens to kill people there because he's looking for the children being held in the basement, which the building doesn't even have a basement, by Hillary Clinton because she and her pedophile friends are feasting on them. And so I was like, this is what, like, we're reporting this. This is so crazy. So then I was like, just to see what's going on. All right, I'm going to look into the story. So I started researching it. And then, of course, what do you find out immediately is that none of this is not only true. And I don't mean about the obviously, she's not a cannibal and she's not eating children. Right? Obviously,
right.
But none of what they're saying it's coming from is true. So as a journalist, what was shocking to me wasn't that there's this crazy story about what people on the internet believe. It was that the crazy story about how this thing was being created was so bizarre and so wild that it was like, this deserves to be investigated. So what I did was I started looking into it, and what we found was it wasn't Macedonian sheep farmers that had made this claim. It was that Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, had left his cell phone in a taxi cab. Someone had taken it, been able to get into his emails, and sent all of his emails to WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks downloaded his emails for people to read. And then, whether it's true or not true, a group of pedophiles, self-described, by the way, pedophiles, on 4chan said, hey, did anybody notice that in John Podesta's emails, he's using language like we use? So as a journalist, my question isn't, oh, well, that doesn't prove anything. But my question is that true that there is coded language that pedophiles use to talk about children and how they're going to access children? And so we looked into that, and that's absolutely true. That's not made up. Wow. Not a conspiracy. They absolutely do. So we put together this thing, and there's a lot of things about that story that are so bizarre and they're so strange. But what we did was we put together a piece, just explained to people, not saying that whether it was true or not true. All we did was said, we've been talking about this for multiple nights on our newscast about this guy who showed up with a gun. And you've been hearing that it's Macedonian sheep farmers who started this thing, but the truth is, this is where it actually comes from. That's all the story is. All the story was to say, this is where it's really coming from. It's coming from John Podesta's emails. This is the claim that was made, that, he talks an awful lot in his emails about cheese pizza.
Weird context and things like that.
Right? Large amounts of conversations about pizza in his emails. Yeah. And these guys who are self-described pedophiles say, this is what we do. And by the way, according to FBI documents, they do. Wow. According to FBI documents, this is what they do. So that's all the story really was. We go into a little bit more than that, including the guy who owned the pizza parlor, and the fact that he was on GQ's list of the 50 most powerful people in Washington, D.C. And we're like, wait a minute, aren't there like
in Washington, D.C.
senators in Washington, D.C.?
Right.
And there's the president and the secretary of state, and there's an awful lot of powerful people in Washington, D.C. Yes. Why would this man who owns a pizza parlor in some beat-up strip mall be on the list of the 50 most powerful people? Mm-hmm. That's weird. It doesn't mean that he's done anything wrong. Right. It's just weird. And so we put this thing together, showed it to our lawyer, showed it to the news director, and they ended up delaying it, and then finally they were like, I said, maybe we just don't even do the story. And they said, no, we should run it. So we ran it. And the next day they were like scrambling because the network was calling, people in Washington, D.C. were calling. Wow. It was like, you need to get that. Why would you put this on the air? Why would you ever talk about this? And it was like this huge, wild thing. They end up calling me in a couple days later and said, so, we're going to fire you. And I'm like, on what grounds? You guys approved this. Right. And they were desperately looking for something. And they said, well, the only way we'll keep you is you have to delete all your social media.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I was like, in a position where, again, 5 kids and wife, and I'm the sole support for our family. And we were just closing on a house for the first time to actually buy a home. And I'm like, I'm over a barrel. I can't do anything. So I said, okay. So we literally turned off all my social media for a year. Kept working for CBS, continue to be their anchor, continue to do stuff, just couldn't do anything online. Did that for a year. And then after a year, had an opportunity using cryptocurrency to come back and go independent. And so I did that, left it there and brought everything back. So, but it was all at the center of that was that particular story.
Wow.
The fascinating thing about it is people will still talk to me about this story, like, you know, what's real and what's not. And what I say is, look, Pizzagate was the first real move, whether there's tons of things wrong with the story as people know it on the internet, right? So I'm not saying that the story in and of itself is an accurate story. Obviously, I don't believe Hillary Clinton is a pedophile or child eater. That does not mean there are not powerful predators in political circles or in Hollywood.
Right.
The interesting thing is that was 2017. Here we are 7 years later. And virtually no one disagrees with that concept anymore, because since then we've had so much about Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, all that's happened with the Me Too movement and what's been revealed about Hollywood. You have all this stuff like movies like Sound of Freedom that have come out, right? That show you the huge circles of pedophiles that are out there. Sound of Freedom avoided talking about anyone powerful being in those groups. But the reality is we know there are powerful people. And one thing we mentioned is, and I'll close with this, and you guys can ask whatever questions you want. But Dennis Hastert, remember the name Dennis Hastert?
I don't. Do you remember that?
Dennis Hastert was the U.S. Speaker of the House. In the 1990s, and around the time of like Newt Gingrich and when Bill Clinton was president, Dennis Hastert was the Speaker of the House, which means he was third in line to the presidency. Right? Dennis Hastert was later convicted of rape of boys that he had coached as a wrestling coach. And when the judge sentenced him, he said that Dennis Hastert was the most prolific and the most violent sex predator that he had ever sentenced. Based on the information, the testimony he had. Dennis Hastert was the Speaker of the U.S. House for years. And one of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C. Does that mean they're all like that? No, absolutely not. But the idea that powerful people cannot also be deranged, corrupted, perverse, predators. I think as a whole, our society is very open to that idea now, accepting of that idea, and realizes there are some real realities to, you know, we talk about draining the swamp. Like the swamp is a very real thing, and very corrupt people have been in very powerful positions in this country, have been and continue to be. I think that's what the story reveals.
Yeah. One of the things as you were talking that I really want to get from you again when we're talking like with him is, how do you experience sometimes, like just in your own prayer as you're talking about things, do you experience something from the Spirit that would quicken you to something? Like you're saying, like, okay, well, I mean, I know we're talking about sheep farmers and eating, you know, I know that everybody would go, okay, that's weird. What's happening there? But are there times, Ben, when you're like, okay, like the Lord is showing you something, or the Spirit is showing you something? It's like, you know, I couldn't have come to that on my own, and you feel like it's from the Lord?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that that happens with most of the biggest stories that I've done. That it comes that way. What I'll do is I'll start to look at it, and then there is it's like a cascade of revelation. Whereas it's like it's hard to describe. But it's like I see something and then it makes sense. It's clicking in a way. And then once it clicks, all these things come out behind it, right? So as a journalist, obviously, you're not going by your gut or what you're feeling. You're going by sourced information. But the sourced information follows very quickly afterwards. It's like there's revelation that happens and then you see it. And it's like, okay, this, and this. That's why, again, if you go back and look at like the actual Pizzagate story, which by the way, you can still watch it on YouTube. Somehow it's still there. You know, I would not call it a fine piece of investigative work. What I would say is that it reveals a lot of things that nobody had ever said on television. Nobody had ever sat down on television and said, did you know the FBI has a list of symbols that they say are commonly used by pedophiles and child predators to communicate with each other. And we showed that list on TV. No one had ever shown that before. And the weird thing is, and then there were some weird things that happened after that. After we did this story, about 2 years later, HBO had a show called True Detective. I don't know if you've ever seen that show. Matthew McConaughey and
Woody Harrelson.
Yeah. And in that show, they use those symbols drawn on like the bodies of victims of some serial killer, right? But they use those symbols in that show. And so there's a part of me that says, well, is that conspiratorial? Is that intentional that they're trying to get this message out? Or is it that they're trying, because it wasn't in relation to children.
Right.
Is it that they're trying to add those things in because they're just creepy? Or is it because
right.
Let's just, you know what I mean? Let's make this more common. So there's a certain amount of, I think, revelation that comes, and then, but once you see it and it all kind of like comes out, it's hard to, you can't not say it publicly at that point.
Yeah.
You know, to share it.
Well, and a lot of your work, I feel like a lot of your work, and again, I've been your friend for a while, and you've had a lot of these segments, is I feel like a lot of your work obviously was driving toward truth, but a lot of it, again, when we're talking about injustice, there's no more injustice than children being molested, or whatever, and a lot of these things have been that way, and I tell people often, and I'm trying to take like politics out of it. I'm not talking about politics right now. Is some of the places where you see the Father most angry is, remember these, is when he said when it talks about scales that aren't, and then the powerful, scales that are cheating.
Yeah.
And then when because that's one of those ones where he actually says, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's in Isaiah, maybe, I don't remember, but he says something like this. It's where he says, basically, he's like, stop with your worshiping, stop with your festivals, stop. Like he's like, the Father's coming in hard, and they're like, well, what have we done to offend you, kind of a thing. And that's what he's angry at. Is he goes, you allow these scales, you allow this dishonesty, you're allowing the rich to take advantage of the poor, you're allowing, this kind of thing. And of course, we know. I wouldn't want to stand before the Father in judgment in that revelation, with this, having this kind of activity going on. So it's crazy that the Lord has you in such a position that using revelation and then the experiences you've had, the capabilities you've had to reveal these things to where even, I don't know if I'm overstating it, and I'm not trying to build you up. I don't know if I'm overstating, but to some degree, at least for a while, it seemed like you'd kind of almost changed the way investigative journalism went. It almost went back to something that probably was what used to happen in the 50s and 60s or something, I don't know. I don't have the historical understanding of that, but you're right. There were times when you did often these types of segments and people were like, why weren't national people onto this? Why weren't, so it feels like the Lord was revealing some things to you that were like, okay, this is crazy. What's happening?
Yeah, I think that the impact that, if I've seen anything happen, I think the impact that we've had through the work we've done has been less about changing the professional part of investigative journalism. Mm-hmm. And what it did instead is it felt like we have kind of led the forefront of what's become the new media. So,
there you go.
You look at today, like, there's a lot of online people, Benny Johnson and Jack Povacek and Liz Wheeler and even the Joe Rogans of the world, right? They're doing a different kind of thing. Right. But I was kind of the first guy who was, we're going to break away. Because remember, when I started doing this, Facebook video didn't even exist. Nobody was doing audio.
Right.
It was literally like we just started putting news segments on YouTube, and then that grew. And then when we did Facebook video, we did 150 million video views on Facebook video in 2016 before they shut us down in 2017.
Holy cow.
So we had these incredible numbers. And I think and we were growing at a rate, by the way, of 13,000 people a day on those social pages before they shut it down.
Wow.
And so we were watching like something really profound happen. I also think a lot of because I, to this day, remain heavily shadow banned. A lot of the fact checking and shadow banning stuff was born out of what we were doing, because it was like, you got to get control of this thing because people don't need this. So I would say there's a lot of people who have become far more famous than I have and far wealthier than I have become by following the tracks that we laid.
Right.
And that doesn't bother me. Like, do your thing, become famous, and have an impact. But it's kind of a weird thing when you're the first guy. I guess they always say, like, the first bird out of the bush is the one that gets shot.
I never heard that. Is that a Texas thing, everyone?
That's what it feels like sometimes.
I bet. Yeah, I bet it does to you, man. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, some of the stuff that the Lord has done with you in that. What do you think? Where do you think the Lord's taking you right now with what you guys have happening? Where are you going? What's happening? Where do you think He's leading you?
I'm not sure. We're doing some really interesting things. We're about to release our first film, so that'll be out probably about the same time this podcast is out, actually. So,
Oh, wow, cool.
it's a pretty incredible documentary film, and it's pretty exciting to me. My daughter watched it with me. She screened it with me the other day, and she said, "This is the best thing you've ever done."
Oh, wow, from a daughter. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's not to overhype it, but I'm really proud of it. It's powerful stuff. It's about reclaiming perspective, right? In this particular case, it's a story of January 6th that nobody's ever told before. But if Trump had not won a few weeks ago, we wouldn't even release it, right? Because nobody would even show it. And there's a reclaiming. And again, it's not a Trump thing. There's a reclaiming happening in America right now of reality. And so one of the things I kind of feel like I'm being called to is utilizing this kind of the skill set and the resources to reclaim some reality about things that have been so controlled over the years and over decades, that have rewritten people's perspectives, or things you're not allowed to see or talk about. And so there's an opportunity at this moment, I think, to, especially in that space of film, to say, how do we start to, like, really open people's eyes to some of these things? And by the way, one of them is the child trafficking stuff.
Yes, that's big in Cincinnati even now, right now.
There's really powerful stuff out there that's been suppressed for a long, long time. So, one of the things that is interesting about the J6 documentary we're about to release is the people who have seen it. We have a couple shots in there from when I was reporting that day from the Capitol. And everybody who's watched it will say at the end, "I didn't know you were there. I had no idea." And so they said it has a different impact. It's not someone talking about what happened. It's someone talking about what happened at an event that they were at. They saw it, right? And now finally you're able to, like, tell people this is what they didn't tell you.
Right.
So I kind of feel like that's where I'm being led right now, into that space and just creating in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
Ben, I wanted to ask you a question. I've been just listening to you and wondering about, you are investigating really powerful people. Even you yourself, you went from 999 followers on Facebook, and I'm assuming your platform has grown quite a bit. And I'm just thinking about, in the church world, there's been a lot of issues with, like, celebrity leaders falling, where power seems to have a corrupting influence. I just wonder, like, what would be some thoughts that you have, just as you've thought and investigated and just thought about power, and you have experienced a level of fame and notoriety yourself? And this may be a vulnerable question here, but what are some suggestions that you might make for people who are stepping into more and more leadership, where people are seeing them and this corrupting influence of power? Would you speak a little bit to that? I'd love to just hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's very difficult because the culture we live in, obviously, people desire for people to be famous, and then they love to watch those people fall. The enemy loves that more than anything. And so, I said at the beginning too that in the first one, I'm not a perfect person. I've never been a perfect person. I have had a lot of failings in my life. And so what I've kind of learned to do is just say, look, I strive every day to be the man that I'm going to be. But I also recognize that I can't live in shame for mistakes that I've made in the past. And so I think that you also have to recognize this, though, that if you're stepping into this world, the enemy, first of all, it's an opposed work.
Yeah.
So, when you do anything that's an opposed work, you just have to know that the enemy's going to come swinging for you. And the most powerful thing he has is shame, right? The most powerful thing he has is the ability to tell you, I heard someone say the other day, the enemy knows my name, but he calls me by my sin. Jesus knows my sin, but he calls me by my name. And so, what I tell people is don't be afraid to step out and to do what God's calling you to do, because the enemy is like, oh, there's going to be, people are going to know, or you're going to have these difficulties. You're going to. If you do an opposed work, you're going to have difficulties. But what I'd also say is, get prayed up and decide what kind of life you want to live, because every bit of it is going to come under a microscope at some point.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you don't do it, right? The one thing that's really interesting about Scripture is that I think we fail in this in the church a little bit, is that we present a picture that surrounds the church heroes, biblical heroes, people in those stories, as being people who, these are really good people. Rarely are they.
Right.
Actually, most of the time, they're pretty grimy people who have a lot of mistakes, a lot of sin, a lot of failures, but they're willing. And so they're willing to do it. And sometimes it takes people who are broken to do something that needs to be done by broken people, because sometimes you need to break things. And so I think that, don't fear stepping out to do it because of what the enemy would hold over you. But just know this, that when you're stepping into that world, you've got to decide who you're going to be. And if you decide, well, I can be one person here and I'm going to be another person over here, and it's really not going to work for you, because all that eventually gets exposed anyway.
Yeah. There seems to be a kingdom principle. Things done in the shadows and in the dark will be brought to light. That is a biblical kingdom concept. It
is. And I was going to say, Carl Lentz, you guys are familiar with Carl Lentz, right? The Hillsong pastor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen the documentary about him and his pretty well-publicized fall years ago. And so he's now doing his podcast, Lights On. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend people check it out. I'm so proud of Carl Lentz and the steps that he's taken with his family and the process they've gone through of restoration and just listen. And people can hate on him if they want, that's fine. But the reality is, this is a man who has failed. He's accepted that, and he's dealt with it with the people who matter. Because you as a viewer you don't matter. If you don't like Carl Lentz or don't like Carl Lentz, his wife, his kids, his God, that's who matters. So so I would say, also recognize this. If you're in the space and you say, yeah, but maybe you're already in it, and you said, I was doing great, and then I've had difficulties, or I've made mistakes in that process. What do I do now? Just keep moving forward, right? Be honest about it, own it, and move forward, because God uses broken people, and he uses failed people. And if he doesn't, he has no one to use.
Yeah, I'm thinking about even like King David. This is the great grandfather of Jesus himself. Talk about abuse of power. The Me Too movement. Just to bring it up. This dude stole another guy's wife. Not even just some guy's wife. It was one of his mighty men.
Who was faithful to him.
Who was faithful to him. So, these issues, the Bible speaks very relevantly to the
and murdered her.
And then murdered her husband.
Exactly.
Talk
about
and murdered 10 other men with him, so he could cover up his murder.
Right. So Nathan the prophet has a little reality check segment where, he's talking about, hey,
you weren't the first man.
You're the man. You're the man.
Yeah,
and yet,
that's good, man.
The gospel is so beautiful that God is in the business of reconciling, redeeming, rescuing, even people that are in powerful positions that are doing really awful things. This is why the gospel is such a scandalous thing that's being offered to the entire world. That even while we were enemies of his, even while we were enemies of each other, even while we were executing all kinds of atrocities towards each other, God sent his son to die in our place for that brokenness.
And those who would say yes to him will be made right.
And the one guy who had all power, Jesus Christ, the creator of the world, the one who had all power, actually came in weakness to come and die for the brokenness of his creation. I think that picture of the one who had the most power was willing to give it up for us and to rescue us. It's
That's
beautiful.
good, Jamie.
Well, and I would say if you're looking at people of influence, I would rather be around people all day long who accept their brokenness and who are ready to be real about that, than to be around a bunch of virtue signalers who are hiding who they really are, right? And then telling the world how awful it is. And I think people have gotten a little exhausted with that as well, right? We're living in this culture where we're just constantly preached at by really corrupt people who want to tell us how awful we are, and yet at the same time are living themselves like secret lives. And so, as you said, whether it's David or it doesn't matter who. I mean, you pick someone, Noah or Abraham, their failures of faith, Gideon. I mean, these are guys who the Apostle Paul, right? Who says, "I have a thorn in my flesh, and the Lord won't remove from me." No matter who they are, their weakness, their failures, don't make them disqualified from carrying out the work. It is their willingness that qualifies them, not their righteousness that qualifies them.
Yeah. Because even in David's example, some people would say, well, when God calls David a man after God's own heart, that seems crazy. He did some really bad stuff. And then you look at the predecessor of David, which is King Saul. He didn't really do all that bad of stuff, but his heart would not turn to the Lord. He was afraid of what the people were thinking.
So here's the theological question for you. So it's the thing that's really tough about Saul is that when God removes his line from ruling Israel, is because Saul won't go to war without first offering a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because he says, this is what God demands of me.
Yeah.
And Samuel won't show up. He hasn't been there. And we've got to go to war, and he won't come. So he offers the sacrifice himself.
Yep.
Then Samuel shows up as the sacrifice is burning, and he says to him, because you didn't wait, right? What does he say? Obedience is greater than sacrifice. And because you weren't obedient, it's going to be stripped from you, and your whole line is going to go to David. Well, David wasn't obedient.
Right.
David, as we just discussed, the guy was a murderer. And it wasn't like, oh, well, then he repented and everything was okay. I mean, God knew where he was headed, and God knew what kind of heart he was going to be. So the question for you, Pastor, is how do you reconcile that, right? For people who are listening and say, well, wait a minute. As you said, Saul was not that bad of a guy. And David was a pretty bad guy.
Yep.
And the kingdom of Israel and the temple, David was such a violent person. Like God even tells him, you can't build my temple.
Right.
How do you reconcile those things?
Well, I mean, definitely for Saul, he feared people and his own reputation more than he feared the Lord. So when he's confronted with his sin, he makes excuses. That passage that you're talking about, he makes excuses. Well, these enemy hordes are coming, and you were late, Samuel. He doesn't. His response to confrontation to sin is not, I have sinned against you, Lord, which is what David says in Psalm 51. Against you and you only have I sinned. Well, clearly he sinned against Bathsheba and Uriah, but he saw it as, I've sinned against you. So the response of the heart when confronted with your sin to make excuses, which was Saul's position, versus the heart that says, I have sinned against you, have mercy on me. That's the man after God's own heart, is the response when I'm confronted with my sin is I say, have mercy on me. I've sinned against you. So that's how I read those two passages.
Yeah, that's powerful. And you're right. It really comes down to what is that? Because it is a relationship, right? David's relationship with God was very different than Saul's relationship.
Yeah, actually, as you guys, as you were talking about that, one of the phrases that when you're talking about the difference, but again, David's a man after God's own heart. Yeah, he's a murderer. He's sexually abusive. And so on, and all that. But one of the phrases that always caught me from Saul is at that point where you're talking about what had happened there and with the prophet, and then he says, and then of course he's being judged, but he says this. Well, would you pray to your God for me? See, you started to talk about that, Ben. You were saying it's the relational thing. Would you pray to your God? So it was obvious, Saul, I think what's crazy is I think Saul sort of lived his whole life of whatever looked good or didn't look good, it really wasn't in relationship with God.
Right.
Because even remember when they used to say, when he was kind of going crazy and all that, and then they bring David in, and then the Spirit would be on David as he worshiped, and it would calm him. But I've said that to many students. I've said that to many people. You can't live on someone else's spirit. It might come in, because I've seen that. I've seen a person who's a drug addict or whatever come into a church worship service and just begin to weep, and the presence of the Lord comes on him, because just being around His glory will do that. But it almost becomes apparent when you come to that last part of sort of Saul's story. They're like, you never really did know Yahweh, did you here? You kind of, because that phrase always caught me. He goes, well, go ahead. Well, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. See, even there's, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Would you pray to your God? He wasn't understanding the actual forgiveness could come from the Father, but David did understand that.
And I think the fact that that idea offends us. Yeah. It's offensive to me to think about David is called a man after God's own heart. Yeah. David stole a dude's wife and then killed him. Let's just make it.
I know.
It's offensive, and that's the idea behind the gospel. This is offensive.
That's the gospel.
The innocent one, Jesus, takes on sin, the sin of the world, and we get to receive his righteousness. That's unfair.
No matter how bad. No matter
how bad. That's unfair.
I know.
He became sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. That's unfair, but that's the point of the gospel.
Yep.
And understanding the character of God. Remember when the teachers of the law come to Jesus and they say, good teacher, and he says, don't call me good. Only the Father is good. Right. And I think that gets overlooked a lot of times, because as humans, we need a very clear standard for goodness. We need to know what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong at all times. And the truth is that relationship with God does not look like that. And so it's why Cain ends up murdering his brother. What is it that God is saying to Cain when he's so frustrated? Because I'm giving you, right, 10%. He's giving you 10%. I'm not giving you my best, but still, why does it matter, right? I'm doing the thing I do. And God says to him, if you would not do what is right, would you not be received? Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing the thing, and yet I'm still not getting received. So I think it's very difficult for people to contemplate, like, what does that look like? Because we really need it to be clear and clearly defined, because we're taught this, right? This is how we as humans interact with each other. Good behavior, bad behavior, right and wrong. And it just, with God, it's not like that. Like how he views us in that loving way, a lot of times it feels, going all the way to the first episode, unfair. Yeah. It doesn't really feel fair that this person can be loved, but I don't think that they deserve that. Right. It's tough.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This has been so good, man. It's been awesome. So good. Yeah. This is kind of funny, but I mean, you can go a different way if you feel like it, but I would actually like to pray for Ben.
Yeah.
Sort of bless what he's got coming up. And especially if this, with this release that you have coming out. Because I remember, see an interview, you were actually making a reference to it, but I remember an interview with Jim, how do you say his name? Caviezel? Caviezel. With
Sound of Freedom.
The Sound of Freedom. Like they struggled with getting that out. And so I'm really thankful that you're going to have an opportunity to get out what you're trying to get out. But I want to bless that because, I agree that when we start to speak out in truth, we start to speak out what is right, then we're going to have stuff coming against us because that's this world. There's an evil one that wants to, hey, for the listener out there, I mean, even if you don't know the Bible very well, Jesus is super clear on this. By the way, Jesus is the smartest guy in the room. He always will be. Always will be. And he says this, he says, there is an evil one who is here to kill, steal, and destroy. And that is very literal even, Yeah. But he says, I've come that you can have life and have that life to abundance. And so there is definitely, no matter where you think you're at, there is a warfare that's happening in this life.
So how about this, Raz? How about you pray over Ben? I love that.
Yeah.
And then I'll close it. I'll pray over the listeners.
That's fantastic.
So you're praying over Ben. I'll pray over the listeners. We can go from there. And I was just going to mention, we'll put all of Ben's info. Absolutely. So if you want to learn more about Ben, what he's doing, and get in contact with him, see some of this content that he's producing, especially Truth and Media, we're going to have that in the show notes below so that you can check that out.
Yep. That sounds good. Is that cool, Ben?
That sounds great, guys. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lord, I just thank you for Ben. Lord, I thank you for his life. I thank you for the many yeses he said to you, and even some of those were difficult yeses. But but I thank you for his willingness there. Lord, I thank you that in his brokenness, Father, that you have used him. Father, I ask that you would bless what he's putting his hand to. Father, I pray that it would have kingdom success. Father, I pray for kingdom success, that there would be changes in structures and changes in justice. And Father, I pray that you would protect him. We ask for the blood of the Lamb over him and over his family and his business. And Lord, we pray for his protection. Father, I pray for his relationship with his wife and with his children. And Father, I pray that you would move in power in the way that you desire to move in power there. And Father, I thank you for him being a good brother and for his friendship towards us personally. But Father, I shouldn't say I love, but I love that, Lord, you use broken people. Because I'm one, Jamie is one, Ben is one. Mikey B is one. And but Lord, you use us for your glory, and it is so amazing to get to be with you and be in this adventure with you, and that you aren't looking for perfect people, because you are the one you are making us perfect, Lord. It's your work in us, as Jamie said so well, Lord. We're exchanging our brokenness for your beauty and for your holiness. And so, Father, I just bless my brother Ben, and pray that you will continue to reveal yourself. Father, I pray that he would stay steadfast to doing what he's doing with you. Yep. Lord, that he would continue to keep asking you, what's happening here? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to see? And so, Father, I just pray he would have an amazing kingdom business, amazing kingdom media business. So I thank you for him, Lord. And I pray you put people in his path that you want to put in his path, who are supposed to be the right people. And Lord, you put people around him, Lord, who love you and will have the same vision that you have there. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, Father, I agree. And I pray for our listeners right now. I pray for any that are feeling the pressure not to say what is true, that they would experience boldness from you, that they'd experience courage. I bless you if you're feeling that you can't trust the things that are being said around you. I ask, Holy Spirit, that you would help them to actually experience you, trusting in you. And Jesus, we honor you. We honor you that you're the best king ever. Like our politicians fail us, people in power fail us. We hear such stories of horrific tyranny and brokenness. And Jesus, we just honor you right now that you are the perfect king. You are the Prince of Peace. Your justice and your righteousness and holiness will last forever. And we even long for that day where you will come and make things right, that every dark, shadowy thing will be eradicated. There'll be only holiness and righteousness and justice. And we thank you that you are happy to, and you are willing to associate with our brokenness, and that you even came into the world to redeem and to rescue, that you were all-powerful, and you gave that up for us. So I pray for my listeners, for all of our listeners right now. I pray that you would turn to Jesus, that even the confrontation you might be feeling of guilt and shame, or realizing, oh, there's something wrong here, I encourage you to turn to Jesus. Say, have mercy on me. And so I agree with Raz. I bless Ben and his continued work. I bless these listeners. And we thank you, Jesus. We honor you. You are the King, who is worthy of all praise. And we love you.
All glory.
And it's in your name we pray.
Yeah. Amen and amen. Yes. Yeah. I just want to say,
love you guys. Thank you. You too, Mikey.
Yeah, he said you too, Mikey V. Back to you. But hey, Ben, thanks so much for being on here. And again, to our listeners, we will get everything down here that you need to keep up with Ben. And I just want to say about Ben, like all this stuff that you were hearing today, during all this time, he was actually like a youth pastor at our church and pastoring, and he's just got a good pastor's heart. And so he's a really good brother. And so we just thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being on here and being honest with us, and appreciate you. And we appreciate you guys for looking in. So until next time, Lord bless you guys.
Bye.